Welcome to a new season of The Journey with a new host. My name is Matt Griffith, and I'm so excited to be able to bring some really interesting and illuminating stories through 2023, and there's no better way than to kick off with a very high-profile interviewee indeed, and that man happens to be Brad Jones, V8 Supercar boss, based right here in Albury, Wodonga. Brad, hello.
Wow, what an introduction, Matt. Thanks for that. I don't know whether it's all true, but I appreciate it.
You know, I pride myself on my introductions to you, Brad, whenever I talk to you on the radio. But
Still looking for that bridge to be named.
Yeah, that's right, and the statue. But Brad, I'd like to start. Usually we start on the journey with the very beginning, and that would be being born and bred right here on the border. But I'd like to start at the end if I could, because I genuinely think that people almost take for granted Brad Jones Racing and what you actually do on the national stage. So you take on the best of the best. You're in the premier class of motorsport in Australia, a world-renowned class of racing, and you take on teams, multi-million dollar teams based in Melbourne and Brisbane / the Gold Coast. You're the only regional team, and you've been doing it for more than 20 years. It's an incredible achievement.
Oh, thanks, Matt. I mean, it's it's funny, really, since Kim left the business, and I was in the other day, and I was there by myself on the weekend looking around, and the amount of stuff that we've got is staggering when you consider how it all started, we born and bred in Albury, and my brother's eldest son, unfortunately, got really sick with a terminal disease, and that probably dictated to us staying here, and it's been a great decision. It's a fantastic place to bring up your kids, and as you've said, the other side of it is we've got something that's equivalent to a rugby league team or a AFL team, and I'm very proud of where we come from, what we do, and where we live.
Yeah, it is an extraordinary achievement, and to be doing it for so long in a business and a sport where it chews up and spits out teams on a regular basis, you've been one of the mainstays of the sport. So we'll get back to that a little bit later, because now we'll start from the beginning, and that is the fact that you were born and bred here, and there's really no doubt that you were going to end up in motorsport, because it's fair to say that your dad was a man who was very passionate about motorsport.
100%. So I was born in the Mercy Hospital, and in 1960, and my dad came from Holbrook, and my mother's parents, I'm not 100% sure, I don't think they were born and bred from here, but my pop owned Albury Motors, and so they used to build and sell standard 10s and Dodge trucks and Dodges, and funnily enough, I was just going through some photos recently that my brother sent me to see how all that worked. And so Dad is quite an interesting story. He contracted polio. He went to the grammar school, which is a Scots school now, and got polio when he was 16 and was taken to Sydney, and they put him in plaster from his hips to his ankles and left him there for a couple of years until a lady came along who revolutionised the treatment for polio sufferers, cut the plaster off Dad's legs and started getting movement back in them. And then he moved home. So by then he was old enough to drive. So as a young guy, he used to play AFL football and ride in rodeos and ride horses and stuff. But he couldn't do that anymore. So Jack Holm, who was his friend that lived across the road, was a mechanic. They built an old car and put hand controls in it for Dad, and that sort of started the journey. And then when he came into Albury, he started selling cars. He worked for Bert Seaton to start with, and joined the car club, and then before long he was president of the car club, and that's when Kim and I came along. And so as kids we had a lot to do with car racing. Dad would go out to the car club and do working bees and all that sort of stuff, and Kim and I tag along, and so we've always been interested in cars and racing, and I've got a million great stories about growing up and going through that life, but cars have been a very important part of our culture and our growth.
Yeah, and I've certainly heard a lot of stories about Phil, your dad.
Yeah.
But what about your mum? I haven't heard you talk a lot about your mum.
Well,
And what was your mum's name?
Nola. So, her, as I said, her family had a car dealership here in Albury, and she trained in Wangaratta as a nurse and didn't finish her time, then got married to Dad. Unfortunately, she contracted cancer when I was 25 and passed away soon after that. I was actually racing in Japan at the time. So, it was quite sad.
Did she love motorsport
No,
at all?
I wouldn't say she loved it, but she was involved in it. But Dad was president of the car club, right? So she would, she had she was obviously very proud of Kim and I and what we were able to achieve, but she didn't really come to the races. But had an interest in it. I was very proud of what we did. I used to race motorbikes as a kid, and she'd come to the odd one or two, but not all of them.
Yeah. So obviously, a big part of the local motor racing scene, the Hume Weir track. I know your dad had a lot to do with that. Let's move it forward a little bit. I would say you're most well known for a few things. Obviously the team now and your sense of humour. But going back in time, you were famous for driving a Mitsubishi Starion in a kind of production racing scene, and then to become the king of Calder. I use that royal terminology because you basically used to win pretty much everything around there, Brad, didn't you?
Well, it's quite funny. Bruce Williams, who's one of the guys I raced against, he runs a magazine called Auto Action. He was at work. And you never lose that, the competitive glint in your eye. And he walked in, and I've got, 6 or 7, 6 of those big, if you won an Oscar championship or a NASCAR championship, they gave you this huge trophy.
This was oval racing for those
oval
that
racing,
don't know, down at Calder, which isn't used now.
And I was fortunate enough to win that championship 5 years in a row, and then I raced NASCAR and won that the first year I went in it. So Bruce came in, he looked and he goes, he sort of sneered a little bit, and he said, I never won one of those. And I said, not many people did. And he just looked
also
at me.
known for your humility. But it was a great achievement, and you were very well known for it.
And it was quite amazing. So really, Kim and I, our dad was a car dealer in Albury here, and he used to sell Porsches and Volvos and European cars. And unfortunately, he went broke around the time that I most needed money to go car racing. And so that made things quite difficult. And so through our racing, we needed to get sponsorship. So our first sponsor with the Mitsubishi Starion was Class Headers, who were an Albury-based company. And Dad actually went in there, took me with him and sold the sponsorship the first time. And that was my first exposure to that. And then we bought the first car on hire purchase, and we had no money, and I had a little panel shop down the back of where the Travelodge was, and so we had it on hire purchase, and then we just sort of try and win the money, get sponsorship, and make the payments on the loan on the car, and started racing, and went okay, and so sort of grew through that, and then I won Australian Production Car Championship, and I was off. So Kim and I'd have that little team, and then I'd go and drive for other people, and they'd pay me, and that's how I made a living. And then then the production car racing paid for Kim, and then we got to a point where we'd feel like we won everything there was to win, and that's when we started oval track racing. So we bought a part build oval track car off a guy in Sydney, and it was an old burnout shell, and then we built it up in Albury, painted it in my paint shop, and Kim did the rest of the work, and we had a little workshop, and then we went down and we finished the car off in Peter Brock's workshop at Birdie Street, and I can remember we pulled up there and had all this stuff, and I knew Brock, but that was probably the start of me getting to really know him. He was great, he let us, gave us free rein, and we built the car up, and then we went racing and did our first race with it, painted the car lime green, and a bit of a long story, but we ran around and went okay. I think we finished 12th or 13th. And we turned up at the next race and we won it, and we had some sponsorship from Bob Jane and Alan Mance. Then we turned up at the next race and we won that. In those days, they paid $30,000 prize money if you could win 3 in a row. And so we'd won 2 and we'd only done 3 races. And then they said, we turned up to the next race, and I got my eye on the 30K, and then they went, no, you've got to win 3 in a row. So then we won the next one, and we won the next one, and then they stopped it being prize money. But
Yes.
you know, they were amazing times, and you know, building the car at Brock's place, because our crew was just a bunch of mates from
Yes.
Albury that helped us work on the cars. So Paul Rooney and Grubb and Colin Dudridge and Bruce and Larry McGuinness, just got local guys who'd come along and contribute. And, we started, we didn't have a clue what was going on, but we worked it out pretty quickly. And that sort of racing was something that really met my eye. And then they'd have 35 to 50,000 people there. So it was quite amazing.
All right. Now, you've mentioned his name a couple of times, so let's just focus on him, because a lot of people still know you as the big kind of motorsport double act, which is Brad and Kim. And Kim has retired from the business, but he was a part of your life and a part of BJR, obviously, through decades. What's your relationship been like with Kim over the years? How would you describe it, and what's your relationship like now?
It's always difficult. I mean, I'm 4 years younger than him, and so, he's had to drag me around, when we were growing up, to a lot of things that he probably didn't want to. And then when we started racing, we were together. We were an awesome team, and we would bicker and fight between the two of us. But then if someone jumped on one of the others, me or him, they'd have to fight the two of us. So it was when he was building my cars, we were awesome. We were unbeatable in just about everything. And I think in the press release I wrote when he retired that, often I thought it was me and him against the world, and more times than not we beat them. And so, and then later on in life, he moved into the office, and that changed the relationship a little bit more. But we've seen each other almost every day, every working day anyway, for 40 years. Yeah, it's a long time.
Yeah.
So it's taken a while to get used to him not coming to work, but he wanted to get out for a fair while, and I don't see him anywhere near as much, but he seems pretty happy with life, and things are going pretty good for me as well. So it sort of worked out. It's probably sad in some ways, but it was clearly time.
So from oval racing, you took on the best in super touring in an Audi famously, and won championships there, and really kind of dominant in a lot of aspects there as well. So then you moved to supercars. So there must have come a moment where you went, it will be better for the business to be based in Melbourne or maybe up in Brisbane, I'm not sure, but I'm certainly thinking Melbourne. So why did you stay, and why do you continue to stay in Albury?
Well, we originally stayed, as I said earlier, because Nigel was so sick, and he was sick for a long time. But there's more to it than that. I think once we started hiring people, we worked out that we could operate a business from here. It's only 3 hours to Melbourne, and if you want to drive to Sydney, it's 5.5 or 6, or an hour on an aeroplane. So we could get most stuff we want. We probably missed out on some good people because of where we live, but we also have got good people to stay a long time because of where we live. So that's sort of the balancing act, I guess. And even anytime I go to Sydney to do deals, because all the people we deal with really are in, certainly for sponsorship, Melbourne or Sydney or Brisbane. You make a plan and you see 4 or 5 people in a day, you can see that in half a day here. So the lifestyle here is so much better. I mean, of all the decisions that we made early on through that process, the best one was to stay here. But, we looked at buying Glenn Seaton's team at one stage, and we spoke to Jeff Polides about building a workshop across the road from Ford. So every time we looked out his window, he saw us. So I thought that was a good idea, actually.
Is it hard to retain staff? I mean, a lot in motorsport, very famously in Formula One, for example, they're all based in a similar geographical area in England, and so they poach each other's staff and stuff like that. But here, you're very distinct in being so far away from all the other teams.
Yeah, but it still happens. I mean, it's I think any game you're in, so any business,
Do they love it here when you manage to get them away from the city?
I feel like at the moment we've got a really great team and everyone gets along good, and you spend a lot of time with your co-worker when you work in a race team. And so we are fortunate that the TAFE in Wodonga has a motorsport course, and we blood young guys out of that and get them up to speed. And, when I stopped driving, we started hiring people from all around the world. So we had people from, UK, South Africa, New Zealand, all over the place. But now it's a little more centralised and a little more local.
Yeah. I know from talking to a lot of them who work for you and have worked for many, many years from, like you said, all around the world, New Zealand, UK, plenty of times that they work here as well, and they show no signs of leaving because they end up loving the pace of it as well. And you still get to go to all these other locations right around Australia, but you enjoy the lifestyle here.
Yeah, and I think the culture that we have at BJR is really important. I mean, this time last year, when we had two new drivers, Andre and Bryce, joined the team, and we had a barbecue, and you've been to a few of these sorts of things we put on, and we're at Scales's place, and Paul had bought a lamb and put it on the spit, and I walked in with Andre, and he goes, man, how many people you got here? And I said, probably 90% of the team and their partners and kids. He's like, wow, I worked in a lot of places, and on a Saturday or a Sunday, 90%, that's ridiculous. But they all get along good, and then we have a cricket team, and they went and played cricket in the Arvo, and lots of the other people went along to watch. So I think and that sort of culture comes from within. So it's the guys that on the shop floor that work through all that and create that. And so it's a close knit bunch of guys, and at the moment it's a pretty exciting time, even though it's really busy because it's a bit of a reset for the business or for the category, and hopefully it'll be interesting to see where we bob out. But it'd be nice to be one of the teams.
Yeah. Well, there is a new Gen 3 series of cars, and it moves us on neatly to the volatility of the sport, I think, because, as I said, it's quite literally chewed up and spit out so many teams. It's just unbelievable. If we go back to when you started in 2000 and added up all the teams and changes of ownership and things, it would be mind-blowing. But you've managed to not only survive but to thrive with 4 cars in the main category and some cars in the lower ones as well. How would you sum up how to survive in the world of top-level motorsport?
Well, perseverance and determination are two important criterias. I'm probably I am a bit of a dinosaur. A lot of the other team owners are either, unbelievably successful business people in their own right in another industry, or Betty Clemenco is a billionaire, and she runs a team, and so and it's really hard. Your income is almost set at the start of the year with the sponsorship that you've sold, but your outgoings fluctuate depending on what sort of year you have and how much damage you get. So there's so many things to that. And honestly, I didn't wake up one day and thought, gee, I should be a businessman. I started, my story is I used to race motocross bikes, and I wanted to go and race in Europe. And I went into my dad's business one day, and I didn't realise that he was in a fair bit of financial trouble, and it was a really hot day. And he said to me, why aren't you out riding your bike? That's why you left school. And I said, it's pretty hot today, Dad. And he goes, clearly you're not focused enough. You need a job. And I went, oh, hang on. And he goes, what do you want to be? And I went, well, motocross rider. So then he's like, yeah, but if you had a job. And I went, I don't know, a sign rider or a spray painter. And so he rang a sign rider who didn't want an apprentice. And then he rang a car repair shop and said to Jeff, if you take on my son, you can have all my work. And so, boom, next thing I had a job, which was quite devastating. Because I wouldn't say I had the best work ethic in the world. And so that was it. And I stayed there for a year. And then Phil Cribb, who was the other apprentice there, he and I went off and we took my dad's business with us. And then we started painting cars, and life was pretty cruisy.
Yeah.
If it was a hot, sunny day, we turn up at the panel shop, and I'd say to him, "Gee, it's pretty nice day. Let's go water skiing." So we go and get my boat, and then we wouldn't, But then Dad went broke, and then it became a real business, and so went through that whole thing there, and then the frustration of having staff and being so young, you didn't know how to handle them. My dad came to work for me eventually, and then I started racing cars, and I was fortunate enough to have that opportunity to be reasonable at a couple of things. And so while I thought racing motorbikes was my future and maybe I should have road raced or something, a lot of the guys that I was racing short circuit against at the time, like Robbie Phillips and Graham Geddes, went on to be amazing road racers. It just, I don't know, it wasn't quite my thing. And then had a break for a little while, got back on the bike, and then Kim had a Formula Ford that Frank Gardner and Bob Jane had sent down, and Kim had rebuilt it, and I drove that around. I thought, this is pretty good. I've had a couple of spins today and haven't lost any skin, and like you do on a motorbike. And so car racing sort of started for me.
Yeah.
And then probably 3 or 4 years in, my career stalled, and I was done. And my dad rang a guy, Alan Horsley, who used to come from Albury as well, and he ran an Oran Park. And he said, look, we've got this production car race coming up, and it's a Pro-Am, and we've got this guy, Peter Fitzgerald, and he's going to be looking for a driver because the one he's got, it's a pro. So he's racing this week in Albury Park. So my dad rang all the service stations and tyre stores along the main road here in Albury because it didn't have the bypass, and said, when you see this pale colour Starion come through on the back of a Bedford truck, ring me. And so they rang Dad down at my panel shop, and he had a Valiant station wagon, and he ran Fitzy off the road at Connell Checkpoint and got out of his car on his crutches and said to Peter Fitzgerald, oh, look, I don't know if you know who I am. And he goes, yes, Phil, I know you are. I've raced the Hume Weir a few times. He goes, good. My son Bradley, he races cars. He said, yeah, I raced against him too in the Mercedes with my Porsche. And he goes, well, he doesn't have a drive at the moment, and I'd like to suggest you get him to drive with you in the Mitsubishi production car. He said, oh, I've got a driver. He said, yeah, he's not going to be allowed. And he said, well, I haven't heard that. He said, I'll tell you what, if you let him drive, he said, if I can't use Hoppy, I'll use Brad. It'll cost you $5,000. And my dad said, done. And he came back to work, and he was so excited. And he said, I've got you this drive with Peter Fitzgerald. It's going to rebirth your career, and it's only going to cost us $5,000. And I looked at him, and I was excited up until that point. And I went, $5,000? Dad, we don't have $5. Like, we can't even pay the wages every week. We're never going to have $5,000.
Yeah.
Leave it to me. So he came to 2AY. And he got $2,500 worth of airtime for a sign on the car. And then he went off. Yeah, absolutely true. And he went off and he sold the airtime. He got $2,500 for the airtime. And then he put together 5 guys who are into motorsport. He told them that, David Swore was one of them, and the Wallace the chemist, and they all put $500 in each. So there's the other 2.5. And then I raced in that race with Fitzy. We qualified in the first 4 cars, I think, on the front row maybe, and Fitzy was 4th when he came into the pits, and I got in the car and I passed KB and won the race. And
wow.
And that was started my career, reignited my career.
Yeah.
And in fact, Kevin Bartlett was a big help to me. He when I passed him, when we were around the outside of him, production cars go so slow, and I had all the fireproof gear on, a full face helmet, and he had a open face helmet on, a scowl on his face, and we're braking, and he's looked across at me as we get in the braking area, and I've winked at him, and he's burst out laughing, and then I outbraked him and passed him, and he came up to me afterwards and said, I bet you thought that was funny, did you? And I said, well, you laughed, and which made him laugh again, and he said, you're Phil's son, aren't you? And I said, that's right. And he goes, yeah, I'll keep my eye on you.
That's
and
great.
he was really helpful. I went to race, I've raced in countries over the world, and Kevin was a big part of that. He helped me through. I mean, I've been lucky. My dad was so well connected, and while I was frustrated as a kid, it did lead to some opportunities. Brian Thompson and Peter Fowler and different people helped me over the years that were to sort of linked to the family. Yeah,
it's like you said, it's such a business that's or sport that's interconnected. Everyone knows everyone.
Yeah, but the fact, like my dad would, they'd have a race at the Hume Weir, and then on Saturday night they'd go to AMV4 to the studio, where that is, right, out in North Albury.
Yes.
And so they would he'd do a live show there for an hour, And so he'd stand on his crutches with a microphone and interview all the drivers. And Kim and I are like a couple of tip rats running around out there getting, helping them push cars in and out, getting everyone's way. And then when that finished, we'd have a barbecue at home and they'd all come around and drink a few beers. And, we'd have
all the greats.
Norm Beachy and Bob Jane, his brother, and, Lacus Medicus and all these, that was Jimmy McEwen. All those guys would be at our house on a Saturday night, and a few of them would sleep on the floor because they were too drunk to leave. And then we'd go out to the races the next day. And it was Bob Jane would stay at our place.
Well, you just mentioned Bob Jane there. Obviously, everybody knows Bob. You've met, worked for, raced against all the big names in Australian motorsport. This is a difficult question, but who do you most admire in the world of Australian motorsport?
That's a really difficult
one. Give me a
one.
top 5 of just names that come to mind.
Well, Frank Gardner was a good friend of my father. So it's people mostly that I've had interaction with. I've been really lucky that I've met and had something to do with lots of people. So Frank Gardner gave me driving lessons in Albury. So and he was my dad's best friend for a long time. And so he was someone who helped shape my career. I had this GTR Tirana, and he came up, and I remember he took me over around Clinton Avenue. That was all no houses over that area, and it was all loose gravel. And so he's jumped in my car and he's gone, "No petrol. That's pretty handy." And I'm like, "Oh, sorry, Frank." And then we went over and he showed me how to balance myself in a car, and we've slid this thing around that area there and spent 10 minutes there. And then I've come home and he's gone inside to have a barbecue with my dad and a couple of my mates. Dave Gleeson and Noel Plummer were on the front lawn. They're like, "What did he show you?" I went, "Get in." So we went over and I'm sliding this thing around. Boom, I hit a gutter. So I buckled the rim and bent the axle and, limped home. Frank, I didn't tell my dad or Frank until Frank had left. And I said to my dad, I had a bit of a moment. But so he's an important part. Bob Jane was a big part of my life. He's really my godparent and Kim's god, and we used to go and stay at his place at my Whaler a lot. So he impacted on our life. Alan Hamilton that ran Porsche cars. He was very helpful to Kim, and there's so many people. Kevin Bartlett, Brock was a big one for me.
That's what I was going to ask you. Pete Brock.
I end up with a really odd relationship with Brock, and we got along. He used to spend a lot of time with Crompton and myself because we were crazy, and he liked that madness. There's a video of me taking him for a lap around Bathurst in my super touring car, and I said to him, we're driving down pit lane, and he'd been quite outspoken before we got in the car. Yeah, we'll see what Bradley can do. So as we're driving down pit lane, he looked across to me and he said, "Nothing to prove here, Bradley." And I looked at him and I went, "Want to bet?" I said, "I think it's ironic that the fastest lap Peter Brock will ever do around Bathurst is in the passenger seat beside me. So hang on, because it's going to be quite the ride." So
it's still on. That's on YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, not that part of it's on YouTube, but it was very funny. And so there's some Moffat. I still have a good relationship with him. There's some Peter Fowler was amazing to me when I was young, and the people that really helped me probably stick in my mind a fair bit. When Jack Brabham came back to live in Australia, he moved to Wagga, and I had a fair bit to do with Gary, one of his sons, and so he would come over to our panel shop. And in those days, imagine having Jack Brabham in your workshop. It was crazy. I always had a good relationship with Alan Jones. I've been really fortunate. I'm sure I've forgotten someone, but all those people helped. John Leffler. All these people helped shape my life and my career, and I look back now, and while I thought lots of times I was pretty hard done by because I thought people could be more helpful. Brian Thompson, he was a big help. I've had a pretty good life.
Have you, in hindsight, looking back, did you prefer driving or being a team boss?
Oh, definitely driving. Yeah.
Just the thrill of it, or the competition generally.
It's all that stuff. It's being an elite athlete is very selfish. And while some people might look at car racing and go, really, but it is, and it's hard, and it's unusual in that it's a team sport, but that final part of it is like kicking gold. You're the bloke with the ball in the last couple of minutes, and it all comes down to you. And I actually quite like that at the time. It's a bit nerve-wracking, but motorsport's been amazing to me when I think about it. But driving the car is the thing. And for me, that was always, I have regrets. I really wish I tried very hard to go to America and race NASCARs, and I couldn't get anyone to give me an opportunity. And there's a couple other things in life that I would change if I had to, but there's other things. Kim and I went to Macau with our Audi Sport team, and they invited us because we'd won the Australian Super Touring Car Championship. They had Tom's Toyota, who the factory Toyota team from Japan. They had Schnitzer from Germany, who the factory BMW team, who won the championship. We had Frank Biller come and drive one of our cars. Frank won and I finished third. It was amazing. They were the best teams at the time in the world in touring car racing, and we beat them. A little team in Albury.
Yeah.
I mean, it's staggering when you think about it. And so there's moments like that which make me really proud.
Yeah. All right, now we're about to jump into a fun section, but before we get to that, I'll ask you one more really serious one here, Brad. What's your biggest achievement? I mean, it's 40 plus years of high-level motorsport, so I mean, it must be almost impossible to nail it down to one. But what do you consider to be your greatest achievement?
It's probably a bit corny, but just surviving, really. Look, I've been fortunate enough to win a lot of Australian championships, and the first one, I always wanted to be an Australian champion something. I didn't really care what it was. And the first one was amazing. The first Oscar Championship. I'd spun the car and flat spotted the tyres, and it was blurring my vision so much. I had to finish, in the top 15 or something because we'd won a lot. And it was blurring my vision. I couldn't see the next corner, because when the thing was going around the track, and I got 2 laps from the end, and I thought I was going to blow a tyre, and I just went, if I stop again, I'm out. And so I'm just not going to stop. And so I just drove that thing around blind for 2 laps, really. Yeah. And it was just very rewarding. So there's that. But really, being able to stay in business as long as we have in such a volatile dog-eat-dog business and build a business from nothing to where we are, that's probably the greatest achievement.
Yeah. All right, let's take our attention away from work for just a second. What does the relaxed, out-of-work Brad Jones get up to? If there is there one nowadays?
He mows the lawn.
Mows the lawn.
Yeah, I live on 5 acres, and I like that nice and green and flat. So I mow the lawns once or twice a week, which is quite relaxing. But I don't do much else other than work.
Yeah,
really.
But family, I know for a fact that family plays a huge
important
part in your life.
Yeah.
And Macaulay, your son, he. You've got your daughter. She works there at BJR.
Madison works there, and Montana is living home for a little while, but she lives in Melbourne. Family is a really important part of our lives, and my wife Melissa is quite long suffering when you think about it. Motorsport is not her thing, and so I've dragged her to a lot of car races, but
Mac is driving in the Supercars category. How are you as a parent of someone, you've done it in the past? What's it like watching Macca take on
I don't
Supercars?
Force feed him a lot of advice. Kids don't listen to your parents a lot, but he's amazing. He's he and I have a really close relationship. We do a lot of things together, and it's harder to watch someone do it than it is to do it. I like the fact that when I'm doing it, all the responsibility is with me. When I'm the team owner or his dad watching him, I have all the same emotions and the pain, but I have no control. I'm just, I'm just sitting. It's like being on an aeroplane.
Doesn't sound as much fun, Brad, to be honest.
Nah, it's not, flying towards the ground and you'd like, bah. But he's we're probably nearly out of time, but the day he said to me he wanted to be a professional car race driver. He's a very good go-kart. He won a lot of races, and we were at home on the couch, and he came in just before it was time to go to bed and said, "Hey, Dad, I just want you to know I want to be a professional race car driver." And I went, "Really?" I said, "Couldn't you pick something easier?" And he went, "Like what?" And I said, "I know, wrestling crocodiles. Like, it's got to be something easier than this. Like, this is the hardest thing you could pick to do. I don't think it's a good idea." And so my wife just sat there and watched the whole thing. And, he was pretty downtrodden. And he's like, "Oh, okay." So anyway, I said, he went to bed. So when he got out of earshot, my wife said, "What are you doing? I cannot believe that little boy came down here and told you he wanted to be just like you, and you just shot him down. What are you thinking?" And I'm like, "What? What'd I do?" I said, I just told him how hard it's going to be. And she goes, "How's your life been as a race car driver?" And I said, "My life's been pretty good. I traveled the world, got to see lots of things." And she goes, "Why wouldn't you let your son have that dream?" So then when he got up the next morning, I said, "Okay, I'll do everything I can to help you." And I have it ever since. And,
yeah.
And, he's I love having him at work, and I love having my family around me.
I know this might sound corny, but what would Phil have said to Macca?
Well, he'd be very proud. It's one of those things I've been thinking about both my parents a bit lately, to tell you the truth, because, I was at a funeral just recently, and there's nothing like that to bring memories back. And look, I'm not sure. I'd like to think both my parents would be very proud of the fact of what we've achieved, the fact that we've stayed here and done that, and we're local and all that sort of stuff. The dad was always quite big on that, and he never went far from home. So yeah, I think he'd like the fact a lot, and I'm really sorry that they missed that last part of it.
Yeah. Tell you what, we could fill a whole chat just on Phil, because I've heard some great stories, but unfortunately we can't. Maybe next time we can do a Phil chat. All right, let's wrap it up with some simple questions here, Brad, just to learn a little bit more about you. If you were able to invite 3 people to a dinner party, dead or alive,
oh man,
who's going to Brad Jones's dinner party apart from myself?
Well, yeah, it'd be you.
No, I'll be in the corner.
I've often wondered what it'd be like to spend a bit of time with Ayrton Senna. So, and when I was a bit more interested in politics, which I'm not now, I always thought JFK would be quite an interesting dinner party guest. And then you got to have some entertainment, right? So you'd probably want Elvis there.
Nice. I like the selection. Yeah. Sweet or savoury, Brad?
Sweet.
Yeah, that's weird. I've noticed that you've got a real sweet tooth.
Yeah.
But often men of a certain vintage, they always veer off towards savoury. But you've...
No, and I've got a bit of an eating disorder, which was always a problem when I used to travel, because I'm a steak and chips guy. And so, but sweet. I'm sweet things.
All right. And finally, do you have any... Now, I know that you love watching documentaries. You love watching weird things that you'll often just pop up and say, "Oh, I was watching this over the weekend and it was crazy." Have you watched anything really interesting lately?
Well, I'm watching Yellowstone at the moment, and I've not seen it from the start.
Oh, I haven't seen it.
It's good. Yeah, it's really good. I really enjoy it.
Kevin Costner, is it?
Yeah, it's like a modern cowboys and Indians thing.
Yes.
And I got to say, watch out. But you're right, I do. I watch documentaries. I love motorsport stuff, but also really weird stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's quite a cross-section.
Now, one stock question here that is often asked at the end of the journey is plans for the weekend. Now, during the season, that often revolves around, I'm about to fly out to Perth, or I'm about to fly out to wherever it is. Are you ready to launch into the new year, Brad? Are you excited? It's a whole new series now with completely different cars.
Yeah, I am. I think that... We're madly building the cars, doing 16-hour days at the moment. Not so much me, but the guys at work. And so I'm really excited, looking forward to where we are for the championship and what we're trying to achieve. So that side of life is good. And on the other side, I'm pretty happy in life at the moment. I got a house out of Splitters Creek and on a little bit of land, and the only thing that's got my attention lately was someone told me they pulled the Lebanon Sports Club down, which was my stomping ground as a child, which we didn't
Sporties.
get to talk about that. But yeah, because you'd be there on a Wednesday and a Saturday or a Sunday, and then they had I had a panel van, but they had a dirt road over the back of it, and I used to get a car full of people and go over that thing flat out and land about 2/3 of the way down that hill, and then fight with it to get it under control to turn right.
Brad.
So that was all before I was a race car driver, and I used to let my hair down a little bit on the roads, but I'm much smarter than that now. So So anyway, that's my life.
Yeah. Well, Brad, you are well and truly your business and yourself personally and your whole family a real border success story. And I think so many people are proud to have a team that competes in the top level of Australian motorsport and represents the border so incredibly well. You've kindly donated your time here because I know you're absolutely flat out, so we won't keep you any longer. Brad Jones, thank you so much for sharing your journey with me today.
Thanks, Matt. And I'm very proud of the fact that I've lived here my whole life. It's a regional country town, and we've been able to represent it on certainly the Australian, but at sometimes on a world stage. And often I say I'm from Albury, and people are like, where? But it's a great place to live, and I've got so many good friends here, and the community as a whole have been so good to me. I love it here, and this is where they'll bury me.
Thanks, Brad. Get back to the factory.
Absolutely.